Have many of you ladies who are considering, separation, going through mediation, have already been through the divorce and the aftermath, have any of you ever felt like that you have jumped from the marital frying pan into the workplace fire? That's what I'd like to address on my video today. This is something that I'm encountering. This is something that often gets very discouraging. There are even times when I go to the Lord and I tell him, I just feel numb. I just feel numb. I have to earn a living. There's no way out of that. And I truly, honestly, at times feel like I just can't do it. And this is a very sad thing. I think that a lot of women are going through this, whether they're divorced or not. Because it seems to me, and I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, I don't have any degrees, don't have a lot of education in the matter, but it seems to me that society has become extremely narcissistic. I've worked for 2 corporate entities in my brief career, and it seems to me also that corporate America runs on toxicity and narcissism and often abuse. So in the 2 hospital environments that I worked in the first hospital environment I worked in, I believe I made 2 complaints to HR, and in the second environment that I work in, I think I may have confined my complaints to my floor supervisor. And in the first hospital, HR did seem to respond appropriately. They did a full-scale investigation. They were actually the ones to refer to the situation as bullying. I did not. I just complained about the behaviors. In the second hospital environment that I worked in, the main problem was a particular charge nurse, and unfortunately she and the floor supervisor were very good friends. So that particular situation never got truly addressed. It got acknowledged, but it did not get addressed. So these are the things that you encounter. It's like you go from a toxic, abusive marriage to a toxic, abusive work environment. And I don't know, maybe you were already there in your work environment, which I think is just, I don't know how you've coped with a toxic marriage and a toxic work environment at the same time. But I believe this is a very real, I'm swallowing wrong, very severe problem. For me personally, my answer was to leave both places. As soon as my contracts were up, I left. And each time God provided a better place for me to go. Now I'm working as an independent contractor, and He has blessed me so enormously with my opportunities, and He's blessed me so enormously with my pay. I'm making more at this present time than I ever thought I would. However, I will have to say that I still encounter unacceptable, unprofessional, and I'm not going to say abusive behaviors, but certainly objectionable behaviors from clients and their family. So in the clients, you can kind of excuse that because you're dealing with dementia, you're dealing sometimes with mental issues that are afflicting the patient. You kind of learn to expect that from the patient. You can, yeah, that's fine. However, when it comes from the families, well, then your answer is to, okay, they're under a lot of stress. They're watching their loved one fail. They're terrified that their loved one is dying, and this is understandable. And you have compassion for that, and you want to, you want to sustain the relationship and be as much support to these people as you possibly can be. But it seems like, in my experience anyway, the more you put up with it, the worse it's going to get. So you try to set what society calls boundaries in place, and you do this in a very professional manner. I think I have already said something about the fact that I drew up a contract, and that was why I drew up the contract. It was like, these behaviors are just getting very out of hand, and I'm not going to work like this, so we're going to do this contract. Well, it doesn't seem, I thought it would make it better. I thought it would make a very clear delineation between what I would and would not accept. And instead, I think in a way, it's actually exacerbated the problem. So when you enter the workplace environment, whether it's a contracting or an employee, you're really at a catch-22. And that's a very difficult, because you have to work and earn a living, and you're constantly encountering the same behaviors that you've just fled in your marriage. I don't have all the answers. I think that the biggest difficulty for women like us is to understand that it doesn't have anything to do with us. It has absolutely nothing to do with us. We're constantly being made to feel like it does, just like we were in our marriages. We're being blamed. I know that a family member of one of my clients not too long ago engaged in what amounted to wholesale character assassination simply because I said I might be getting a new client. So it's very hard for women in our position to understand this has nothing to do with us. It's not because we have a problem. It's not because we've done or said anything wrong. If we've behaved professionally and we've behaved responsibly, we don't have anything to reproach ourselves with. So that leaves the individual who's throwing out the toxicity. It is their problem. It is their issue. It isn't anything about us, our personality, or our characteristics that is provoking this kind of behavior. It's what's going on inside that person. And so this is when the understanding comes into play. Well, her husband's got dementia and she's not getting any sleep, and she's worried sick, and they've spent decades together, and now it looks like it might be coming to an end, and she doesn't know how she's going to go on with any other kind of life because this has always been her life, and she feels threatened, and you can go on and on and on. There are so many hundreds of excuses for this behavior. I said that wrong. There are so many reasons for this behavior. There is no excuse. There are so many reasons, and they can all be perfectly valid. There is no excuse. Abuse is abuse. Manipulation is manipulation. Gaslighting is gaslighting. And again, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any kind of degree. And maybe I shouldn't be throwing these things around. But I've done a lot of research since my marriage broke up. And I think I do know a little bit of what I'm talking about. And there is never any excuse for targeting people with one's behavior. There's no excuse. There may be a million reasons, but there's no excuse. And I think that that's where women like us really have our difficulty, because we're not used to drawing boundaries. And unfortunately, it seems to be the same in the workplace, even if you're a private contractor, that it is in marriage. If you draw these clear delineations, then one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to straighten up, fly right, and cooperate with you and act professionally, or they're going to dump you, or they're going to keep targeting you until you're forced to dump them. That's the catch-22. And we see that in our marriages. We're coming from that in our marriages. And I personally think that for me, that is a huge reason for the burnout. I'm not really burned out so much because I'm tired of taking care of people. I like taking care of people. When I have the opportunity to get a new client, I get excited. I like people. I enjoy being around them. But when it comes with the abuse and the toxicity, even your body's going to start reacting. Your body is going to start reacting. So when you have that, I'm done with this, I just want to get out of here, I want to dump this client, and I don't care if I don't have enough money to live on right now, I just want to get away from this. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It may not be the most sensible thing to do at the time. And I'm going to be honest with my audience. I think I may have done that. I'm still waiting for confirmation for my next shift with this particular client. So I may have done that. I may have really shot myself in the feet. But hey, I used to tell the husband when things would get really bad, and I would chalk it up to workplace stress. And I'm sure that may have been playing into it. Yes. We can be homeless and still be a family. We can be homeless and still have love. And I've kind of come to that. I've done research about living out of my car. I've watched YouTube videos that are put out there by people who live in their car or live in their van. And I've considered the very real possibility that I might have to do that. Because at the end of the day, I have to have my sanity. You have to have your sanity. I have to have my integrity. You have to have your integrity. Sometimes there's a price to be paid for that. And I don't want to sound hopeless, because again, as I've said over and over and over, God has taken care of me. And I believe He will go on to take care of me. I haven't been homeless yet. I have no reason to think that God's going to abandon me to that. But sometimes you have to make decisions that don't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Just like when I made the decision to serve my husband with divorce papers, it didn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. I had no job, I had no career, I had no education, I had no work experience, I had nothing. And then I found out that I had no money either. And that, even the courts couldn't wrest money out of him because he had no money. I think I've confided before. I got $1,500 cash, and that was it. So sometimes the decisions that you make, sometimes the decision that God wants you to make doesn't make sense. And I remember years and years and years ago, one of my pastors actually preached a sermon entitled, God Doesn't Always Make Sense. So, if it's time for a shakeup, it might just be time for a shakeup. If it's time to change careers, pursue a different form of education, if it's time to jettison what you've always known and what you've always done for something new, it may just be time. And I will confide to my audience that I've gone back to the old premise of, well, I could go to the local college and do my CNA classes, and at least I'll have that CNA under my belt, because yes, God has given me a little bit in savings. I can coast for a while if I have to. Do I want to? No, that's kind of scary. But God is in control of all of this. And I know that that sounds like a hideous cliche, but he is in control of all of this. And there are just times when you have to say, look, this environment is making me sick, and I have to get away from it. And people can tell you, oh, that's the old you. You don't have to react that way anymore. Well, I'm sorry. You know, I don't will myself to have a heart attack or a stroke in reaction to the stress that I'm living under, nor do I will myself to have my stomach balling up in knots and breaking out in sweats, and you know, I find myself chewing out the inside of my mouth. You know, are these behaviors that can to some extent be controlled? Yes. But again, you know, you drop dead of a heart attack because you're so stressed, or a stroke because you're so stressed, or your blood pressure goes through the ceiling because you're so stressed. That's not necessarily a decision you're making. That's a decision your body is making. And so don't feel like you're losing your mind. Don't feel like there's something wrong with you, or I could get along somewhere. I just can't get along anywhere. There's something wrong with me. I can't get along anywhere. I can't get along with anybody. No, that is not the case. It's not the case. This is a very valid problem. And I don't have all the answers. I can tell you what I've done. And sometimes I feel like even that's not working. I suppose that's just life. But I believe, especially after what I've been through in my marriage, that God does not want his children to be used and abused in any type of situation. And he will provide a way out. He will provide a way out. The important thing is the hard thing is to rest in that. To rest in he will provide. And I'm not saying that the answer is to just sit here and say, okay, Lord, I'm going to wait for you to provide. No, he does expect us to work. He expects us to seek opportunities. He expects us to get an education. He expects us to do whatever we have to do in order to move forward. But I think that many women wind up thinking, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get along? Well, in the first place, you're most likely coping with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And you're trying to live in a work environment that is pretty much the same as the environment that you're trying to heal from. And healing in itself can be an agony, and it can be very confusing. So when you find yourself asking, what is wrong with me? Why can't I get along with anybody? That's not the problem. On the upside, you're learning what your boundaries are. You're getting the courage to call those boundaries. You're getting the courage to act on those boundaries. And you're also maturing enough that you're learning to be responsible for doing that, for all of the above. I used to tell my daughters there are consequences to everything we do, including the good things that we do. It's not just the bad things that we do. It's not just the stupid things that we do that have consequences. Even the good decisions have consequences. And ladies, we've all learned that. We've all learned that. We made the good decision to take care of ourselves and get out of an abusive marriage. And there were consequences to that. Very hard consequences. And this about the workplace is no different. And I think that the best thing that I ever did in any of these situations, including the present one that I'm in now, is, Lord, I can't live like this anymore. I can't live like this anymore. I went to him like that with the first hospital over and over and over. Lord, I just can't go on like this. I can't live like this. It's making me sick. And then, were my circumstances better in the second hospital? Yes, they were. But because the supervisor was unwilling to help with the situation with the charge nurse, it became pretty much the same thing. Now, I'm not going to say that I cried every time I clocked in at work like I did at the first hospital, but it was certainly toxic enough that I spent my days dreading being there, hating being there, and I spent my days off dreading to go back. And, in each case, I would just go to the Lord and I would be like, I can't do this. And it's okay to say that. It's okay to say that. If you really can do that and God knows that, then he'll make a way for you to do that. If he thinks it's time for it to stop, he'll put a stop to it. And because I think that's the biggest favor that I did myself, was to just go to God honestly and say, Lord, I can't live this way anymore. And in each case, he provided a better way. So don't be discouraged. It's not you. If God wants you to stay in this workplace environment and lay the groundwork for moving on later, then rest in that. He's making a way for you to get out. Plan, prepare, go gray rock, don't react. When there's abuse, just don't react. Look up ChatGPT, and I'm not a big fan of AI for obvious reasons, but ChatGPT usually has really good responses to abusive statements, abusive behavior, and if you're stuck there for a while, then so be it, because you can make your plan. You can start making your plans to get out. Move on, move up, move forward. So just know that God is there. He knows what the situation is. He knows how long he wants you in that situation, and he will guide you to prepare to get out of it and move to a better situation. But if you're stuck feeling like there's something wrong with me, I just can't get along anywhere I go, no matter who I interact with, that is not true. That is not true. It is not you. You've simply become more aware of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Thank you all so much. I don't know if I've been a whole lot of help, but at least I'm here with you. There's this lovely man, and I can't think of his name, but he has this touching channel, and I think it's called something like Sitting with Dogs. And I love to watch those things because it's literally as if he gets down in the misery and sits there with them. And maybe that's what I'm saying. Maybe that's all I have to say today is, hey, I'm here. I'm sitting in the misery with you. I don't know if anything that I have said has been of any help, but I certainly love you and I know what you're going through. And any comments that you can put with the video, I'm sure that there are lots of people who would be as grateful as I would be for those comments. Thank you all so very much.